Good morning. This is John Bushka. I'm going to discuss the Harmon Story Circle for screenplays as a prelude to a successive video on my own plans for my Do Ask, Do Tell book, the first of the books, which is the narrative book about how I got involved in the gays in the military issue. But I want to go over my interpretation of what a Harmon Circle should consist of. So there are 8 steps normally. And the first one is the you or me step. The protagonist is introduced in a sonata form, in a sort of a sonata form exposition. You could think of this way. Possibly there's a brief prologue, and we know who the protagonist is. Sometimes it might be a team or more than one person, a couple or something. But that's where you introduce the lead character, who will incite the action of the story. Step 2, the protagonist needs or wants something novel. Now, it should normally be something novel to them as they are now. It's normally something from the external world, but it might be something psychologically novel and unprecedented for them, like wanting intimacy. I think that's a perfectly acceptable want for a screenplay in some instances. The protagonist then goes on a journey, in a sense. In my case, it was leaving home, but they go when challenged by an initial problem, which in my case was going away to college. And then something happened when I went away to college, which became a serious blow. And that actually became the problem. So the initial problem itself may be a serious blow in itself with respect to an entire screenplay or an entire story. The protagonist then, after having this initial problem, searches for a challenge so that they can meet their want more successfully. And that may be quite extensive and may require a lengthy adjustment, personal growth of some kind, more than they expected. But the protagonist eventually finds and locates the desired objective or solution. Now, that's not the same as actually taking it. It's just like in software, you can locate the key for a record, but not, you can locate the key for a record, but not actually load the contents into storage. So, by comparison to computer programming, for example. Then in step 6, the protagonist takes the objective and then may be surprised by a sudden or new pivotal challenge, which is more serious and a greater challenge to the protagonist's sense of personhood and philosophical belief than the initial problem had been. And so that leads to the return step, or step 7, where the protagonist has to meet the challenge, and this is a very difficult process, often requiring some kind of personal sacrifice or paying a heavy price. They'll lead to changes in the protagonist's core belief and will actually sort of keep the audience hooked on the story and will lead to a final result that is important. The protagonist finally reaches a new steady state and is changed in some way with some sort of core philosophical beliefs. Now, I've said that this is sort of like the sonata form in music, where the first stage, maybe the second, are like the exposition, and then you have 2 development cycles, 3, 4, and 6, 7, because 3, 4, and 6, 7 sort of parallel each other, with 6, 7 be more intense. And then you have a recapitulation and a coda and maybe a prologue. There are a couple of correlated expectations, and one is that the protagonist, which I said might be a team, isn't always just one person, but usually is, that will be matched by at least 3 other characters normally. There's an antagonist or an opponent with opposite beliefs, and then by analogy, maybe to square dancing, that's the analogy I like to use, there may be a partner who is a friend or ally of the protagonist, but has some opposing beliefs. There may be a corner, like in square dancing, who is on the other side but may share beliefs with the protagonists. You know, they say that in politics there are strange bedfellows sometimes, and that would be an example. It's also true that a screenplay, you can have a Harmon Circle for each act of a screenplay, and you can break it down with self-similarity or fractal-ization, and then analyze the detail of each act and with respect to many fine points, and have these stages within each act. So I will follow this very soon with a more detailed example of how I'm going to break down the entire screenplay for Do Ask, Do Tell, the first Do Ask, Do Tell book, and then give you some example even how I would decompose it further. But that's it for today, and thank you for listening.